Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, the number one source for news, analysis, and discussion on the Detroit Red Wings, the NHL, and all things hockey. Here are your hosts, Ryan Hanna, Brad Crisco, and Evan Lopsinger.
Ryan, you really couldn't have ponied up to get us all to Milan for this one? That's where the action is.
Our backer, our funder for the podcast is middle right on my screen. So you go ahead and ask Evan why we couldn't be funded to go to Milan.
You know, we only had the budget to get us to like the edge of Spain. We couldn't quite move any more east. I'm sorry.
If we dropped one, like one of us could have, I would have stayed home for you guys to go. It would have been all right.
Max, earlier this morning, I picked up a penny that was hidden like behind a bunch of boxes in my basement. A penny in my own home. I don't know that we're as close as you think we are budget-wise.
All right, we'll start the savings account for 4 years from now.
Where is it in 4 years?
Well, it doesn't matter because we would plan for it. We'd get a year out and the NHL would decide they're not going for some reason after we have booked the flights and hotels.
2030 will be easy. French Alps.
Oh,
yeah.
I think Evan's going to be there anyways.
Well, I was going to say, if Evan's getting us that far, you know, all the way to the edge of Spain, we can walk the rest of the way there. So
I'll do that. Well, for now, the Winged Wheel Podcast is absolutely not in Milan. We are not enjoying the Olympic break. We are continuing our Detroit Red Wings coverage. And we have this is our full Red Wings Roundtable, our first one in at least a year. So we're joined not only by Max Bultman of The Athletic Detroit for a bonus edition of his Good in the Room appearances, but we also have Prashanth Iyer, contributor in the Winged Wheel Podcast world as well on the show. So it's a full table here. Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and lots more. Sitting in my own home because Evan is not generous enough. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
I'm Max Bultman.
I'm Prashanth. And I'm Evan.
Thoughts and prayers for you, Brad. I feel like that one barely made it out of you.
We're struggling minute by minute today.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, it's going to be a bit of a different one. We are pre-recording this on Monday, February 9th. This is not going to be a usual edition of the show. It's going to be pre-recorded. It's going to drop for you on the 15th, and it's going to be just a full analysis of the Red Wings season to date, the trade deadline upcoming, player storylines, strategies for Steve Yzerman, basically a State of the Union type of thing that we try to do at least once a year. So it's not going to be a news and updates kind of episode like you usually might have, but still something that we try to do every once in a while. Before we jump into it, Saturday, March 21st, Winged Wheel Podcast Night at the LCA. Get your tickets, wingedwheelpodcast.com/Red Wings. It's our partnered event with the Detroit Red Wings where we host a live recording of the show at Little Caesars Arena. Your ticket gets you not only access to that show, but also the Red Wings game against the Boston Bruins that night, which right now is poised to be a pretty important one. You also get a special limited edition co-branded Detroit Red Wings and Winged Wheel Podcast Centennial themed hat, and every ticket purchase represents a donation to the Jamie Daniels Foundation. So again, wingedwheelpodcast.com/Red Wings. And if you want to help the show out, go above and beyond and get benefits like bonus episodes, the Discord, and giveaways, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast goes a long way for us. So really appreciate all of our patrons. Let's jump into it. The Red Wings, as of the Olympic break, are in a playoff position. And I know, if the five of us had been talking preseason, we wouldn't have said that's crazy. But I think the path to get here would have seemed genuinely insane. And so, well, let's start this one broadly. And I guess, Max and Prashanth, will start with you. What do you make of the Red Wings' path to get here so far? And how different does this season feel than previous playoff pushes, if at all, to you?
The biggest difference to me is that they have not been the streaky team that they were in years past. I mean, last year, they're 6 points ahead of where they were after 58 games a year ago. But the path to getting there last year was nearly hit rock bottom by Christmas, make a coaching change, have 2 7-game win streaks, and then hit a lull in the start of March. This year, it's just been very consistent. They really haven't even had a really long win streak yet. It's just been that they've reduced the downside by so much. And the famous stat is the not going consecutive games without a point since the end of November. I think that's pretty revealing. But even there's only a couple of times where that point even matters. They really haven't lost consecutive games often for most of this season. So that's been the biggest difference for me and just the sign of a more stable team.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think when you think about good teams, you think about teams that can beat you in a number of different ways, because I think a lot of coaches will tell you, one player, one line is not going to do it for you the entire season. And historically, that's what the Wings have been. But this year, you can almost break the team up into different months where different parts of the team have carried the team through that month. So, October's really that top line was on fire. Dylan Larkin was on fire. You go into November and all of a sudden now you're getting depth contribution. You're getting that second line starting to get going with Alex DeBrincat and Patrick Kane and Andrew Kopp. And then December, you have Mo Seider and John Gibson. And then, January, again, it's still more of that depth scoring. Again, John Gibson continues to carry it. But it's been different ways that the team has been able to sustain success. And, to your point, Max, I mean, after a loss this year, or I shouldn't say this year, but after a loss since that 4-game losing streak, the Wings are 8-2-1. Like they don't skid. And that's just a huge difference for me. And one of the big reasons why they're way ahead of where they were last year.
And I think the reason for that consistency that you guys have been alluding to is it's just like you guys have mentioned, the floor is higher. Seider's breakout is huge. And obviously that's going to go a long way. And even calling it a breakout's disingenuous. He's got help now, which just helps his stars shine even brighter. But when one guy like Larkin lately isn't going, all of a sudden there is a Alex DeBrincat and Andrew Kopp, a Lucas Raymond who can still contribute and go. Like, I don't know if we've seen the Red Wings this year firing at full clip, which is maybe the reason for optimism, even though there's a lot of warning signs right now where, yeah, I can't remember a stretch of more than a game or two where the first and second line were really rolling. And the baseline on defense, now that Johansson and Bernard Docker have proven passable, which was dicey early in the season, it's just that you go into every game not needing a handful of players to carry you to a win. There are other candidates that have been doing it, and the guy I haven't even mentioned who's the biggest contributor to this is John Gibson. When you have a goalie who you can count on, and even just call it 80% of the games that he plays, the floor of the team is substantially higher.
It's interesting because I remember right around the end of November, a lot of the coverage, and I remember one of our analytics writers, Dom Lucian, writing about how the Red Wings top, core, he was even using the core 4 term that I think everyone should outlaw from their hockey coverage, but alas, was playing elite and they just needed someone to step up behind them. And really since then, it's kind of been the opposite story where the depth has really stepped up. And now you're kind of looking a little bit at the top of the lineup and been like, hey, there was a point early this year where the Red Wings top line was absolutely elite. Larkin and Raymond. And I wrote a story about this after the Edmonton game where I thought it was like the best hockey Larkin had ever played. It's been a quieter stretch for him since the start of December, but because Andrew Kopp has been so good, because James Van Riemsdyk has been so good, they've cruised. And of course, because John Gibson has been so good, they've cruised in spite of it. So it's a great point by Brad in that if you are able to marry those two for any amount of time, and especially if that time comes right around mid-April, that would be a very good thing. I mean, that would give us the window into what the full capacity of this team is. And you rarely get all 20 players firing at the same time. But if you can get the elite ones going at the same time and the most important ones, it means good things usually.
I know we talk about the floor in terms of like the depth guys coming up, but we're also seeing, career-like seasons from some of the best players on Detroit. Like Alex DeBrincat's one of the leading goal scorers in the league. You're seeing, JVR is an unexpected addition, and he's got 14 goals this year. You're getting something out of Emmett Finney, which you weren't expecting as well. Moritz Seider's having a Norris caliber type season. So, as much as the floor has been raised with some depth guys, like the best guys on this team are being the best players and having some of their best seasons as of right now. So they're getting bigger contributions from their best players, which is always a good sign as well.
I think that's such an important point because if you think about the conversation we've had about this team for the last, 4 or 5 years, it's where are they going to get the elite talent from? Where is that going to come from? And all of a sudden you now have a group of guys that are playing as arguably one of the best elite cores in the league. I mean, I don't think that's disingenuous or even overstating it to an extent. When you look at the combined contributions of Larkin, DeBrincat, Raymond, and Seider over the course of the season, I do think you are talking about one of the elite groups in the league. And, Max, I know you wrote about it. I've written about it. Dom's written about it. It really is a huge piece. So I think, Evan, your point is spot on, that not only is it the depth has been better, but I really think the elite guys have established themselves as this is an elite group that can carry this team.
So like what we're all saying here is that even when this team has things that are going wrong or there's warning signs, it's not like previous seasons where, those levels or that position is going to zero. Like if a guy drops off, it's not as low as it has been in the past, and there are more opportunities for support. It's not, the usual suspects who are going to jump in. Like Evan mentioned, you got the Finneys and the Van Riemsdijks on top of everything else we've talked about. And that's the summation of a good team. It almost crept up on us. Like, you still talk about the team when things are going well positively, and when things are going badly, there's still the same kind of negative, worried tone from coverage and from the fans. But if you take a step back and look, like the Detroit Red Wings are a good team. Now, the next question is, are they so good where you're really, really, really confident that the playoffs are still, way more likely than not? That question's been made almost artificially more complicated this year because it feels like everyone in the Atlantic and the East got way, way, way better. And so it's a weirdly tight race this year. But, on the other side of this Olympic break, do you see any kind of warning lights flashing, or are you pretty comfortable if you're the Red Wings?
I'll start with this one. I do think there are a couple of warning signs to pay attention to. I think if you look at the team over the last month, and this is using numbers from Sportlogic, but they're 25th in expected goals for, 22nd in expected goals against. They're best when it comes to goals saved above expected. And so that's, again, relying a lot on John Gibson, but they're not generating a lot of high danger chances, 31st in the league over the last month. They're not generating much off the cycle. They're giving up a lot against the cycle. They're not generating much off the rush, things that were usually hallmarks of McClellan's team. And maybe some of that is fatigue from playing so many back-to-back, so many 3 games in 4 nights. Their schedule is going to lighten up, so that could certainly be helpful. But those are a couple of warning signs just over the last month where I think you can really sum it up to the 5-on-5 offense. You really want to see that pick up in any way that it can, but that's kind of the only thing that's flashing the concern for me right now.
And the 5-on-5 offense is such a recurring issue, right? Like it was probably the biggest downfall a year ago. And 2 years ago, this interested me. I didn't realize it to this extent, but 2 seasons ago, they were the second best 5-on-5 goal creating team through the end of February. And it completely cratered when they got to March. And that suggests to me that it was a team that was really fueled by rush offense, that was finding out how much harder life gets when other teams are completely dialed in on checking. Now, this year, they're not a great 5-on-5. They're 27th in the league at 5-on-5 offense creation. But the one silver lining I will say is I do not think they've been nearly as rush dependent as that. So there's really nowhere to go but up from where they are right now. So it's not surprising for me to say that I don't think they're going to collapse in the same way offensively they did 2 years ago, but I think it's just a more well-rounded team. There's a higher defensive floor. Not being able to score 4 goals in a game doesn't kill this team in the way that it certainly killed that team 2 years ago. They didn't have the defense. They didn't have the goaltending to hold up. This year's team, I think, does. I also just think the way that they've generated the offense that they do get should translate a little better. Not completely. I think it's still a reason that it's one of the areas they need to address at the trade deadline is they need to create interior offense, screens, tips, deflections, rebounds, but more a part of their recipe to this point than it was in years past.
Yeah, and one leads into the other, right? Prashanth was referencing them being near the bottom, or at least lower than 20 in terms of expected goals for and against. But when I watch this team, you can just see them struggle to maintain offensive zone time, to maintain possession of the puck. And when that's happening, where is the puck going to be most of the time? Your end. Which is why their expected goals against is probably higher than the eye test would suggest it should be, because I don't think it's a ton of high danger chances against, but it's a lot of chances against because it's a lot of D zone time. But circling back to the earlier conversation, the floor is higher. These guys can weather these storms like they couldn't in previous years. And thanks to the 5-on-5 offense, which I agree is my biggest concern right now, they are being asked to weather it a lot, but they are at least doing a better job in previous years. So I think over the last couple of weeks, we've seen what I would feel is the worst case scenario of this team. They look exhausted. A couple players look hurt. They can't generate a goal to save their lives for long stretches, it seems. But they haven't cratered with all that happening at the same time. I know John Gibson's the biggest reason for that. But in previous years, if the Red Wings played the last month like they've played, but you go back to the old roster, we're talking about what would feel like an 11-game losing streak right now. And they still are getting points in more games than they're not. So again, I still think the warning lights are flashing. The 5-on-5 offense is a legitimate issue. And I think that's creating more problems in the D zone. But the optimist in me says, I have a hard time seeing them play worse than this. So if this is, worst case scenario, they should be able to at least hold on. I'm not comfortable with saying that, but I think they should be able to.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, Brad, as bad as they've been, I also neglected to mention their power play has been 23rd since January 1st, 18.6%. They're 9-5-3 since January 1st. Like, you shouldn't be winning and accumulating points when they're playing the way that they're playing. They are. That's great. You don't want them to continue playing this way, but I have a hard time seeing every aspect of their offense continuing to falter at the rate it has been. And they picked up a lot of points when it was. So it's the sign of a resilient hockey team. And so I think there's a lot to be optimistic about here.
Just to add one more thing, I think about that stat you gave earlier, Prashanth, about the record after a loss. And that has Todd McLellan written all over it. Just if you think about it in terms of what he's been focusing on and what he talks about, I know Max, post game after a tough loss where a team loses in a familiar way, he would often say things earlier in the year of like, we can't just pick up one thing and drop two others. At some point, these guys have to understand what it takes to be a winning team. And though it's been a slog, and he's definitely been through the grind with a young team and a team that hasn't been winning, even for the guys who have been there, they have made progress on that front. And so I think you can point to the players and you can point to the goaltending, but Todd McLellan also deserves a lot of credit here in terms of the impact he's made in making this roster at least close to the sum of their parts.
Definitely. And one other point I want to make on the goaltending, while we talk about like trends from past years that are they going to recur? They've been going to John Gibson a lot. And he is certainly more used to that than Alex Lyon, than Ville Husso, than Alex Nedeljkovic. Need I go on? But I wonder what you guys think of the level of usage they're going. It certainly seemed to me like by the Olympic break that he was on fumes and it was starting to creep into his game.
Are they saving Cam Talbot is my question, because they know they're going to have to lean on two goalies. If you want to make the playoffs, you want your starter to be as fresh as possible, and you want Cam Talbot to be fresh. And they know through experience you can't count on Cam Talbot if you've already been, leaning on him heavy in November and December and January. So are they trying to save him to allow them to use him in March, April, and then use Gibson confidently in the playoffs?
But going into a break, like my point is, I think they rode Gibson this hard because they knew they had a break coming. But you just mix in one more Talbot game last week, and I think Gibson looks a lot fresher. I get it. By the time you're at the end game, that Utah game was really the one where I thought it looked the most egregious. Certainly in the first 10 minutes from Gibson, and at that point, it's like, okay, well, we could have gone to Talbot, but it was the break right after that. So, but just little things that I was noticing by the end. It's just such a pattern that I've seen in past years where they ride the starter almost too hard through this part of the schedule, and I don't know if it's repeating or not, but just something that caught my eye.
I guess the one nice thing is they've gotten out of having a lot of back-to-backs already, right? Like they've gone through most of them so far this season. So they'll be able to be a little bit more selective on how they want to play their goalies going forward. And, if you looked at John Gibson's stats, his best years were when he was playing 50 to 60 games. He's obviously not the same age. The youthful legs are probably a little bit more gone. Probably not for Cam Talbot since he's the most athletic man on the planet. But yeah, they can be a little bit more selective now. Get Cam Talbot in for the right games. Give John Gibson a rest when he looks like he needs it. So it should be a little bit more predictable going down the stretch here.
So through this Olympic break, other than, the war between the three of us versus the two of you for the Canada-USA rivalry, I think what every Red Wings fan is thinking of from a Red Wings perspective is, one, please stay healthy. And I say that at great risk because this will be releasing after the tournament's already started. And 2, what is Steve Yzerman planning in terms of what to do when the trade freeze lifts and before March 6th at 3 p.m., the NHL trade deadline? And Max and Prashanth, I want to get your perspectives on what would be your biggest priority if you had to choose one, / what would be the actual strategy if you were Steve Yzerman this year, considering where the team's at?
For me, it's a right shot D. I think they need someone who could play on the second pair. It's clear with how they've used Axel Sandin-Pellikka that as much as he is going to be a part of this team's future, they do not trust him against other teams' best players in late game situations, protecting a lead. They'll use him when they're chasing a lead because he's got that kind of game-breaking offensive vision. But up, with a lead, or sometimes he'll make a mistake and they'll sit him for long stretches. I have a very hard time seeing them go into the home stretch of this season without having made an upgrade there that they know they can give 20 minutes a night to, that can hold up against opponents' forechecks. And obviously with where they're at, I think that it limits the market because I think you probably have to try to get term if possible. You could go the rental route, but if the prices get too expensive, if you're talking about anything more than like a second round pick or like a B prospect, I don't think that they're at a place where they can do a first round pick for a true rental. So I think it's got to be a right shot D, and I think ideally it's got to have at least one extra year of term.
To give a different opinion here, I will actually say I think you need a jolt of offensive scoring in the bottom 6 forwards. Because if you look at this team right now, we just talked about all their struggles at 5-on-5. It's been a recurring issue. And right now, your bottom 6 is not really giving you much at 5-on-5. I mean, Finney, Comfer, Appleton, Soderblom, Rasmussen, JVR. JVR does most of his damage on the power play. Ras hasn't really been all that consistent. Appleton hasn't been that consistent. Comfer had a couple, the other night, but otherwise has been largely inconsistent. And then Finney has really seen his scoring drop since he's been moved off that top line. I think getting yourself somebody that can play in that bottom 6, that has a little bit of that offensive upside, may be just as important. The Wings have survived being able to bench ASP. And I think they can do that once Edvinsson comes back and you sort of have those, him and Sider taking on a bulk of those extra minutes. But I don't think you'll survive if the 5-on-5 offense continues to go away and you don't really have potentially another guy that can chip in for you.
Here's where I worry, though, is unless it's like one of the home run, call it swings at forward, Robert Thomas or above or just below that in terms of offensive aptitude, if it's a depth forward, I tend to think that it is harder to guarantee that a depth forward is going to come in and make a meaningful difference, especially as this Red Wings roster is composed, where we've seen at times, whether it's their top 6 or bottom 6, they've both gotten hot and cold at different times. Meanwhile, if you look at defense, it's almost like it's lower hanging fruit. So you can almost guarantee you bring in, he's the name that's the cover story for this, but you bring in a Justin Falk and he's your second pair right shot D, I would bet everything that I own, the very little I own, including the penny I found in my basement earlier, that would be a net improvement on this team. And so I think you can comfortably go shopping for non-premier players on defense and kind of guarantee the impact on your team in the short term more confidently than at forward. That could just be me. I'm not saying that's a decided truth. I know I have a bias towards defense, but that's my read on it, and that's my hesitation with bringing in a depth forward.
The interesting thing too, and I agree that more 5-on-5 offense is a need, and certainly that would lend toward adding a forward. I just think you have more internal irons in the fire there. Like there's more paths to that coming from what you already have. We've already seen it a little bit with Marco Kasper, who I think generates that style of offense right around the blue paint. He's come on over the last 2-3 weeks. But I also think you got guys in Grand Rapids, and I know it's unproven, but Michael Brandsegg-Nygard is that style of player. I don't know that I'm expecting the production certainly in his rookie year in late season games from Nate Danielson, but he's got some size, and I think he's a viable option. Certainly if you had an injury, you would feel okay about playing Nate Danielson as your 3C in an important game. It'd be okay. I don't think you have anything close to that on the blue line, and that's where like the blue line elevates to me in terms of the needs.
I think it's almost 2 different conversations for me. I know I've talked about 5-on-5 offense being the biggest need and where I'm doing my primary shopping, and I still hold that opinion. But where I differ a little from what Prashanth was saying is we've seen depth guys come in and play in the bottom 6 of this Red Wings group, and it feels like they're in quicksand because they almost never replicate their offense once they get into this group. It's like the offense gets sucked out of them. And so if you go out and acquire a decent bottom guy who's on a, call it 15 to 20 goal pace on whatever team he's playing now, that's going to drop to 8 to 10 goal pace because that just seems to happen. I think you have the luxury with defense because of Seider and Edvinsson not needing a stud. So you're not going out there big game hunting. You're not putting, 3 premium assets on the table for a trade. You can go get a Logan Stanley type guy just to, again, raise the floor even more and be another body there that can shelter an Axel Sandin-Pellikka. I think at forward, I'm big game hunting exclusively. Like, I'm going for Robert Thomas. I'm going for Jason Robertson. And I'm going for Jordan Kyrou. And if I don't get one of them, then I'm probably just not doing much up front. And I understand that's a problem because, again, biggest issue is offense. But I think you're going to have a much easier time finding a guy who can help the defense because I think a depth guy, just a 5-6 guy, would go a long way to solidifying that in Detroit.
And that you could do as a rental. You could find a 5-6 as a rental for a second round pick or a prospect like a Wallander or a Bouillon or guys who, with the Ben Sherrod extension suddenly look pretty blocked for their paths. And those are appealing assets to teams. NHL ready prospects.
Yeah, 100%. It can be a second round pick, third round pick, a B-level prospect. Doesn't matter. You can go the rental route because, again, it's inexpensive and it helps. I think an inexpensive forward isn't going to move the needle for this team at all. I think an inexpensive defenseman could.
I will float one other devil's advocate piece here because I think, to be fully clear, I think the defense probably is the group that needs the biggest upgrade. I think if you're offensive hunting, like you said, Brad, I think you have to be very selective in who you're chasing. I mean, it's likely a guy who could probably play above bottom 6 that you're slotting bottom 6 simply because of the way the wings are structured. But how much does Albert Johansson's improvement over the last month and his comfort level in playing on the offside impact the need, knowing you'll likely get Edvinsson back post-Olympic break? You may have a solid top 4 of guys, even though that would require Johansson playing on his offside.
It affects it. I mean, certainly Johansson's played well. I still look at the body type and say, against playoff physicality, it's unproven. It's at least a risk. But he's played his best hockey over the last month. His skating is very good. He's a smart player. He's got a chance. He played a lot in that second pair role last year with Edvinsson. I thought Edvinsson held his own and Johansson more survived in that role, but it's a year later and it could be that he's ready to take on 18 to 20 regularly. I just think, do you really want to leave that to chance? You have this huge war chest. You can go get a guy who's natural there, who's been there, done that. That's still my inclination.
That's where I ultimately land too, is it's the war chest is so big. You've decided that you want to try to compete within these next few years of, call it the Larkin to Brinkett window, and not that you're making core decisions based around it, but you only have Patrick Kane for so long as well before that's a problem that you have to replace him too. And so, go out and solve both problems if you can, for sure. The Johansson thing, I agree. It does make me feel more comfortable. That's been a great revelation. I don't think you need to stop short just because Johansson would be a good solution. I think it'd be awesome to have Johansson do that so you can have 3 different defensive pairs go out confidently. That's the kind of thing that makes a team surprise in playoff rounds and be able to weather the storm when you get different kinds of teams throwing different play styles at you. I've brought it up a trillion times, but the way Boston plays Detroit struggles with. But that's not the only play style. It's not just the big physical game that jams up Detroit. We've seen the New York Rangers earlier this season really jam them up. The Carolina Hurricanes seem to be there. Unless we're raising a Fedorov's jersey that night, the Carolina Hurricanes seem to have their number for 60 minutes. So if you can go out there and get the defense to a level that we haven't even seen in the last 11 years of this show, that'd be an awesome place to get to. So there's no such thing as too much of a good thing on this team.
For me, what it comes down to on the defense, and I'm going to phrase this in a way that sounds overly harsh to one guy in particular, but I think it is the situation here. You can't play Travis Hamonic. He's just struggling, and if an Axel Sandin-Pellikka gets cold or looks exhausted, or if JBD's little resurgence here lately falls off, or Johansson comes back down to earth and you need to sit him for a couple nights just to regroup or to rest or to nurse an injury, you can't put Hamonic in there. You just can't. So who's the guy that you're bringing in. You might rotate all 3 or 4 of these guys in and out of the lineup based on who's healthy, who's going, who's rested, who's feeling it. And then all of a sudden, when one of these guys sits, it's just like, you see the downgrade so obviously. Just that 7th option, 7 viable guys so that no matter who you're parading in or out any night, you feel confident. If someone gets hurt, you're not completely sewered. And again, that could be a number 6 guy, that could be a number 3 guy, depending on what's available out there. But I just think one more guy needs to be plugged in there to just give you that confidence that you need in the group no matter what.
It was a little weird to me that we didn't see Wallander called up in that stretch with Edvinsson out, just because it was such a defined stretch of 5 games, small sample, everyone knows the deal, call them up and see what happens. And the fact that they didn't do that, it feels telling to me that it's also not going to happen after the break and in a playoff game, which to Brad's point, it very much defines where the limit of what they're comfortable with is. And it seems to be right around at Travis Hamonic and Eric Gustafsson. And so you got to decide, like, are you comfortable going into a playoff series potentially, knowing that you're likely to sustain some injuries over the course of a playoff series, knowing that that's the first one up. Like, you can make the argument that it's enough to get by, but I certainly don't think it's the dominant position to be in. You want to add one more and have, either Sandin-Pellikka, Bernard Docker be the 7th guy on a given night. And that's where I think when you feel really good about a playoff series.
I wonder how much of that has been colored to, like, whether it's Wallinder and how he's been performing in Grand Rapids, but how much of that was also colored by their struggle with making it work with Sandin-Pellikka. And it's just, McClellan and Yzerman are like, we can't compound this by doing this with someone else. Maybe Johansson's return to form, if that continues, then they feel a little bit more comfortable, but then you're getting into March and teams aren't really experimenting with new players at that kind of juncture unless they have to. So it's all, a really good point so far. And I think the next topic of conversation is who they may seek to bring in, because I know, Max, you've done a lot of good work on what trade targets might be. We're going to get to that after a quick break and a word from our sponsors of the Wing Wheel podcast. Back after this. Welcome back. Like I promised, we're going to talk about actual trade targets now. And we could start with the forwards or the defense, but I'm biased and I like to annoy Brad. So we'll start with the defense. And Max, like I mentioned before the break, you have done a lot of really good work and research in terms of who this could be for Detroit and what kind of fit they would be in Hockeytown. So what are the names that stand out to you?
I think let's start with the one that you already teased, because I do think he's the best fit. It's Justin Falk in St. Louis. You're looking at a guy who's like a defensive stopper type, but he brings real offense. I mean, this is a guy who, if you just look at the 5-on-5, we talked about 5-on-5 offense, he has more 5-on-5 points this year than any Red Wings defenseman. And that's, I would say the strength of his profile is what he does defensively. So you put him next to Ben Sherratt, and you suddenly have kind of that more classic playoff second pair on defense. It would make the coaches sleep a whole lot easier at night. I'll tell you that. And it's interesting because I did have a commenter on a story push back and say, like, hey, like Falk has his expected goals for per 60 are low, and they are. They're lower than the rest of the Red Wings regulars in terms of expected goals for per 60 minutes. But by expected goals against per 60 minutes, he's only behind Seider and Edvinsson among Red Wings defensemen. By the actual on ice goals for per 60 minutes, he trails only Seider. So good things are still very much happening offensively and defensively when Justin Falk is on the ice. It's just that one component of the expected goal stat. And it's true, like the on ice expected goals when he's out there are low, but I'm willing to overlook that considering everything else in that picture.
I think to that point, Max, you're also not bringing him in necessarily for his defensive stopping nature. I think you're bringing him in because, one, he can chew up a lot of minutes on that second pair for you, but two, he gives you a different dimension from the blue line that we don't have in Detroit right now. And I think that's the critical piece when you're evaluating a guy like Falk, just pulling again some numbers from Sportlogic, and we thought he's 9th amongst defensemen in 5-on-5 cycle chances. So what you're talking about there is a guy that's getting activated in the offense, getting down below the goal line. And if you're just looking for a smell test on if this really matters, the guys ahead of him are Cale Makar, Quinn Hughes, Zach Werenski, Evan Bouchard. That's just kind of the top 4 right there. So you're going off of a pretty offensively minded and kind of a good smell test there. The other piece that I think is he does a great job of generating offense in the zone by getting to those high danger areas. He's fourth amongst defensemen in inner slot shots at 5-on-5 this season. So earlier in our conversation where we're talking about how do you add more 5-on-5 offense to this team, it may actually be a guy that can generate it from the blue line and step in and really be that fourth forward in some situations at 5-on-5. And to Brad's earlier points about struggling to maintain offensive zone time, maybe that's a guy that you actually want to look to add and do that. So it's an interesting proposition, and I think he would be a really unique fit for Detroit, not just from where he would go in the roster, but the kind of style he plays and how unique he would be for this roster.
Now, the only thing is after Falk, and there's a reason why Falk is the name that we keep coming back to, because after him, I would not say it is a robust market for like solidified, established second pair defenders with some term. The two other names that stand out to me, Rasmus Ristolainen in Philadelphia and Dougie Hamilton in New Jersey. New Jersey's situation is a little weird. We don't know if they're going to be a true seller or if they're going to try to, make another run into the playoffs this year. But Hamilton also has a big salary. It's at $9 million a year. Or actually, that's his cap hit. Salary is lower. But he's got a big cap hit at $9 million a year. So to me, that complicates things. Like Ristolainen, I think, would be the middle ground option here. Like I don't think he's as good as Falk, but he's got more size. He certainly has mobility. He can do the job, no doubt. It would be very funny to go back in time and tell Red Wings fans in 2021 that their second defense pair was Ben Sherratt and Rasmus Ristolainen and see what everyone's reaction to that was. Hamilton, I think, is an interesting one. It's a big number. And so in a perfect world, you would have probably wanted to see like a mutual contract termination there when everything was, going haywire when he was scratched. It doesn't look, that obviously hasn't happened to this point, and Hughes has been hurt. So that has fueled New Jersey's, preference to keep him for that time. But if they do get out of it, I would imagine he's out there and it just becomes a contract tolerance question.
For me, it comes down to value proposition, because the reported asking price for Justin Falk is steep. First round pick plus for a year and a half of Justin Falk. And he's a great player, and I like the guy, but that's a big price for what he brings. I think the value in Dougie Hamilton is that he's so expensive. You're not giving up a first round pick plus to get him. You are just eating cap space. And as Florida and Vegas have taught us, the salary cap isn't real. So you can work around that in a million ways, and the Red Wings are flush with cap space. So if your golden child is cap space, you overpay for Justin Falk. If your golden child is, I want to keep premium assets for if the Jason Robertson or Robert Thomases of the world shake loose, well, then you go for Dougie Hamilton. And I don't think there's a wrong answer there, but it is kind of a what's your flavor type situation. And we talked about it a couple episodes ago, but like Ristolainen for his contract price, all that, I'm not super interested in, but it would be better than nothing, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's right on Ristolainen. The key thing with Hamilton is you're going to have the Edvinsson deal that you have to do this summer. So that's a deal that's going to go from making under $1 million to, in my opinion, $9 million overnight. Are you prepared to add two different $9 million defensemen in the next 6 months? Like that is...
You had two different $30 million pitchers to the same owner, so why not?
No salary cap in that sport. So that's the difference, right? And then in a year from now, you're going to do another deal for Alex DeBrincat that's probably going to hit 8 figures. So the cap space goes fast is what I'm trying to say. Like $9 million for Dougie Hamilton, you could tolerate it this year, but it could become a problem as soon as next year when you have to do Edvinsson.
No, it absolutely could be. But again, there's so many other ways you can shed cap space, and it's not ideal because on top of Edvinsson's raise that he's going to get, I still want Detroit to go out there and get another big name forward. Even if you get Dougie Hamilton, you still need to be all in on Robert Thomas, Jason Robertson, whoever the hell else shakes loose. But again, you look down the lineup, there's a lot of $3, $4, $5 million players that you can jettison to make it work. It'll be tight, but again, it's not like Dougie Hamilton has 4, 5, 6 years left on this deal. So with how flush the Red Wings are for cap space right now, I don't think it's so prohibitive that if really good things start to fall in their lap, they can't do it. And this is all under the assumption that New Jersey doesn't retain any at all, because you can pay to get a little bit of that if you want. I just think I personally would rather take Dougie Hamilton, eat the cap space, and figure it out later if something good happens. And if you don't luck into a Thomas or a Robertson, well, whatever. At least you have Dougie Hamilton then. And figure the rest out later and keep my first round pick and keep my good prospect, because right now we only know a handful of players who are available on the trade market. But that doesn't mean this time next year there isn't going to be 3 or 4 more as new teams go belly up and start selling. And because I don't think this time last year any of us would have thought Robert Thomas would be available. So I don't know. I would rather roll the dice on Dougie Hamilton and keep the assets and then still go big game hunting. But if that's not an option and you can get Justin Falk for a reasonable price, I think that's the more prudent option. But I would also call that the less likely option because, like you said, the D market's barren. Everybody's going to be bidding for him.
With the, I would say that if they're able to pursue Robert Thomas, it probably means they're not going to be able to bring in a premier defenseman. Like I think if you're going to go in on that trade, like that's going to cost you premium assets. It's going to tie up cap. I think at that point you probably are looking at more of a rental D in that vein, and whether that's, you know, Brett Kulak or Connor Murphy, and those guys might be more expensive than people out there are mentally ballparking too. So that gets tricky. But I don't think you can go top end ad at forward and then also get an impact D. That might be an either or at that point.
I don't believe that. I get it's hard and it's not simple, but again, just the gymnastics that Florida and Vegas and a lot of these other teams have pulled off. If you go trade for Dougie Hamilton and then St. Louis calls you back and goes, you guys have the best offer for Robert Thomas, let's do this. And then Detroit's like, okay, but you have to take Rasmussen or Comfort or whoever back in the deal to make the cap work. And if that costs you an extra second or third round pick, so be it.
The difference is Florida knows its core is good enough to win. Like when Florida goes and trades for Seth Jones, they do so knowing that what they had before Seth Jones was already good enough to win the Stanley Cup. The Red Wings aren't 100% sure that what they have right now is good enough to make the playoffs. And so I think it is. But I'm just saying, like, the way that they've operated so far tells you, like, they're not all in yet in terms of where they are in their competitive window. So just to do one of those deals, I think would already be a huge step forward. To do 2 in 1, you know, before the trade deadline here, I would be very surprised if they did 2 this year.
I'd be shocked if it happened. My only point is you shouldn't do one because you're afraid the other might happen. You just do it. And then if you get that 1 in 100 lightning strikes, trade falls in your lap, you can still make it work. And I'm at the point where I still get a little choosy with who I'm trading for if I'm the Red Wings. But I'm also at the point where if a good player becomes available to you at a reasonable price, you don't say no because of what might happen next. You do it, and then you figure that out later if you have to.
I think that's a really interesting point to just mention, because if you are thinking about trade deadline prices, they're often astronomical, right? So, you know, the philosophical question becomes, should you really be hunting, trying to fix multiple pieces here? Or should you really be saying, at the end of the day, okay, if a big fish comes, I will spend for the big fish a Robert Thomas. But if there's not a big fish, then maybe my better play is to just shore up this team, ensure we get into the playoffs, address the concerns in the offseason. And that's potentially where your prices are a little lower to make 2 deals. I think at a minimum, you want to guarantee you get to the playoffs. And I do think this team probably needs incremental help, not a ton, but just a little bit to ensure they get there. So the question then becomes, how much do you really want to spend value at the deadline, given what the prices typically look like? Can you just do a little bit now, push yourself in, and then go bigger in the offseason? Just throwing that out as an idea, not necessarily saying it's the right way to go.
I like the thought there, and in a perfect world, that is the best strategy, and I agree with it. The problem is I don't think the Red Wings have that luxury, because if they do get a Robert Thomas proposal on the table and they're giving up 4 first-round value assets and it's a huge overpay, and then they say no, they risk waiting till the summer. 5 or 6 more teams who are interested get a little more cap space, get another draft pick, whatever it might be. And then all of a sudden there's more competition and he goes elsewhere. Again, if it's a true star player, like I'm still picky with middle of the lineup, bottom of the lineup guys. Like don't just get a guy, just you can be picky there. But if that top 4, top 2D, top 6 center comes available, pay whatever the hell you have to pay to get it done, because we have had this conversation about a dozen players of this caliber over the last 3 years, and 0 of them have ended up in Detroit. Like, when the reported asking price of 3 top 15 value picks was the ask for Robert Thomas, my first reaction was, I'm mad Detroit hasn't already done that, because I would happily pay that price. So I just think in a perfect world, yeah, but I don't think the Red Wings are going to get a perfect scenario. And if they just happen to be at the head of the table for once, they got to sit.
It is interesting because I think we all base this off the framework of what Quinn Hughes went for, which was a big number. And I do wonder, is Robert Thomas closer to Quinn Hughes or Noah Dobson, who the price was not that severe for this offseason? My gut is it's probably closer to Dobson. Now, that being said, either of those players would make the Red Wings way better, and I would feel like the Red Wings were close to a playoff lock, Quinn Hughes or Noah Dobson, and I feel the same about Robert Thomas. We've talked for years about what if you had 2 centers of Larkin's level, you would have 2 centers of Larkin's level. So it's worth pursuing very aggressively, but it is interesting. I had the same reaction, Brad, when I was like, yeah, 3 top 15 picks. That's what I thought. Why is everyone acting shocked by this? But that is partly influenced, I think, by what we saw Quinn Hughes go for.
What this all comes to for me is we're in an era where Detroit has already missed taking advantage of a lot of like the flat cap pressures, right? They did some things, but they didn't really make a big move. That's fine. It's the NHL. It's hard to make moves. The cap is going up by a lot. You're flush with cap space. You're flush with assets in terms of picks and especially prospects. You have, whether or not you believe in the core, you have made the decision you have to ride with making this core work. So you have to act as if you believe in them. And if you wait much longer, you're not only wasting prime years and potentially causing frustration with key players that you can't afford to lose, they might add more teams to this league by the time you're ready to make those moves. And so the talent pool becomes that much thinner, and all of a sudden you're fighting with an expansion draft. And so I replay this in my head constantly when we have these conversations. It's that Ted Lasso clip where she's like, well, obviously don't go and do that, be reasonable. And he's like, no, live. And it's like a meme, but in my head I'm like, yeah, loath though I am to do it, I agree with Brad. I'm like, at some point you got to just go, and I don't see a world where this is going to feel anything other than uncomfortable. But even then, like, okay, let's take the St. Louis example. They have 3 guys who you think of. 2 would be absolute home runs, and the addition would be Justin Falk, and the home runs would be obviously Thomas, and if they go so far as Parayko. That's St. Louis. You have a history of dealing with St. Louis. You have a history dealing with Armstrong. Like, it's all there. You couldn't really ask for a better makeup here. The only thing that would hold this up is if the price is way different than what's being reported, or the trade protection, those players don't want to come to Detroit, in my mind.
So do you guys know who Andrew Friedman is, general manager of the Dodgers? Yeah. So 10 years ago, he had a quote, if you're always rational about every free agent, you will finish 3rd on every free agent. And that feels like kind of where the Red Wings are at right now with free agency and trades. It's like they've been very rational. They haven't got any of the players, and that's going to continue if you continue to be strictly rational.
Yeah, exactly. You be rational with the third liners of the world, because I don't want to be paying the JT Compers of the world $7-8 million as the cap rises, but I will happily pay the Jason Robertsons of the world $14 million if that's the only way you get them. So yeah, just big fish need to come to Detroit, because it hasn't happened outside of the one guy who forced his way to Detroit.
And I don't want to make that seem like a criticism, like the entire play up to this point has been scared and tepid and it's been to Detroit's demise. No, this team is flush with assets and cap space right now because of Yzerman's strategy. Not perfect, but by and large, really good to get them to where they are without winning a draft lottery. Like, they didn't pick up a Macklin Celebrini at any point here. But as we've said time and time again, it's really hard to add good players in this league. And it's also really hard to make moves or get free agents that are, the ideal age or the ideal AAV. So the conditions right now, in my mind, are set up as well as they ever will be.
100% agreed. I mean, we've been talking about this for years, but it's never actually lined up like this, where the team on the ice is deserving of an addition. They have played their way into this level. You have a core that's led by your captain, Dylan Larkin, who will be 30 at the end of this season come July. And you have guys that are now going to start moving into that next phase. You already have Mo Sider, who's established himself as a Norris level player. You have Lucas Raymond, who's established himself as potentially being a top 15 or top 10 scorer. This is a team that is now mandated that you go out and make it better as quickly as you can before you start wasting the tail ends of the primes from Dylan Larkin, Alex DeBrincat. Now, these are not guys that are going to fall off the cliff next season, but they're now guys where now you're going to say, we have seen their best hockey. And those two guys in particular, especially when you're talking about another contract for DeBrincat, having to replace Kane's scoring, whether it's as soon as this offseason or another year from now, there are things you're going to have to do to fix that. But you have four guys that have gone out, established themselves as elite players. It's time to go ahead and add for them. You have the biggest treasure chest of anybody in the league, arguably, after Minnesota spent. And you have arguably the most cap space and one of the best cap situations moving forward with all your top players locked up, save for DeBrincat. So I think this is a very different situation than we've ever had, simply because now this team is dictating you have to do this.
And I think the gaps have never been more obvious, right? Like, I think, you grab 10 Red Wings fans at the LCA, they're probably all going to say some variation of the same thing. And I think it's been a real help that the Red Wings have been able to get glimpses of MBN. They have some found money in Finney. They know where he could potentially fit in the lineup going forward. ASP, although he's struggled a bit this season, he's going to be an NHL player at some caliber. So I think the Red Wings know exactly where their gaps are now and where they're going to be in the future. So if it's shoring up the team with a depth addition this year to get them in the playoffs and gather all those benefits for the current iteration of the Red Wings, great. If it's to go big game hunting, they also know that there's probably not superstar talent somewhere in the pipeline. So I think the Red Wings are in a fantastic position for all the things you said, Prashanth, and I think the gaps have never been clearer for this team.
All right, we're going to take another quick break, and when we're back, obviously we're going to continue the conversation back after this. Let's pivot over to the Red Wings. I think the trade conversation is pretty well fleshed out there in terms of where we all sit. Going over to where the Red Wings are now and the concept of them being deserving of an addition, I don't think that's debatable. Todd McClellan has said that. I think fans have said that by and large. And then you look at what really hasn't gone perfectly this season, and Dylan Larkin has been the topic of conversation. Obviously, we've been talking about that time and time again on the show. And I think it's an interesting one. You want to see how he's going to do coming out of the break, but what is the feeling around his play, especially since this started December? And I'm going to go to you, Prashanth, first, because I think you had some interesting stats that we were discussing before we hit record here.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the surface, and I think, Max, you covered this in your last article that Larkin was at like 4 5-on-5 points since the beginning of December, and I think he's added to it since the article came out. But it's very clear he's not scored at the rate that we would expect a player of Dylan Larkin's caliber to do, and a player that really was doing so just as much at the beginning of the season. One of the things that's interesting is, as we're covering this, I mean, to my eye, he doesn't look like the same player he was in October. I think, we've talked about him fumbling pucks, skating over pucks, giveaways in big situations, just almost gripping the stick a little too tight at times. But at the same time, one of the numbers that surprised me when I pulled this up from Sportlogic was Dylan Larkin is 6th in the NHL in high danger scoring chances in the last month. He has 39 of them, and the guys ahead of him are Zach Hyman, Connor McDavid, Tyler Bertuzzi, Austin Matthews, Wyatt Johnston. It's a pretty good list that's right there in front of him, and he is sitting there 6th. Now, bulk of those come on the power play, where he feeds and really does most of his damage. Not as many of them, are coming at 5-on-5, but at the end of the day, he's still getting a ton of chances. We're just not seeing the puck go in the net. And I think if you go back and watch and think about the number of posts he's hit, or the number of times where maybe he's, whiffed on a puck and that still counts as a missed shot or a blocked shot and it ends up being recorded as a chance. Like, there have been opportunities for him to record a lot of goals and a lot of points. And maybe this is the time where things start to turn. I mean, as a team, the Wings are shooting just over 7% at 5-on-5 since January 1st. That is going to turn. And it'll likely start with Larkin. And if they continue to generate chances at this level, maybe he's the one that's coming out of the Olympic break and doing that for Detroit.
It's funny because I'm probably not going to get to a career high in goals, but he's going to surpass 30 goals this year as long as he stays healthy. And for what the narratives have been, and it's valid because the 5-on-5 offense has been light. That's important to keep in perspective. He was so good over the first 2 months and has been continued to be so good on the power play that he's still right there production-wise. It's just the 5-on-5, and it's a flashpoint issue for the team, so that's why it always comes back into the spotlight. But I thought that was a very illuminating stat, as is the puck battles one that you had. That one I think is maybe as important as the goal-scoring one.
Yeah, just noting, I forgot to mention it earlier, but in terms of puck battles over the last month, Larkin is 7th. And again, the guys in front of him, Macklin Celebrini, his teammate, Andrew Kopp, Adam Lowry, Nico Hischier, Nick Suzuki, again, kind of the centers that you're thinking about as being really strong two-way centers. Those are the guys that are sitting there in front of him, and Larkin's sitting there at 7th in the league over the last month. So he's still competing. He's still generating chances. Most of it is on the power play, but he's still putting there's a chance for production to uptick is what I'm sort of getting at here.
And that goes back to what we talked about very early in the show about what could be different about this year's team at 5-on-5. Well, it's the approach that's leading to the stat, and to have your top 2 line centers in the top 7 in the league and puck battles won over that span is encouraging. It tells you that your process is right and you would expect offense to follow. It hasn't yet. It's going to be a concern until it does. That's the way it is when you've had your collapses the last 2 seasons. We're going to be under a microscope watching these guys until we see it. But those are the promising inputs.
Going to other players, because I think the Larkin conversation, I mean, we've had that ad nauseum even before you guys came on. Thinking of guys like Lucas Raymond, how do you feel about how he's obviously started the season hot, hurt his shoulder, was kind of in the same boat as Larkin for a little bit, but I think returned to form more so than Larkin can say he has. Are you feeling like his season is pretty much more or less dictated by how he feels confident in his shoulder? And what have you seen from him so far?
I think he's elevated himself again. I think he has a very real chance to finish with 90 points. They want him to shoot the puck more, and that could certainly be influenced by how the shoulder feels. But again, he's another one has a very real chance to finish with 30 goals this year. And if he doesn't get there, he should get pretty close as long as he stays healthy. But he has evolved into, I think, one of the very best wingers in the league. Maybe not quite at the Kaprizov, Pasternak level yet, but he's not far off of that. And in the next year or two, I think he has another step in his game yet. So
I was just going to say, I think the most exciting part about Lucas Raymond is the stuff that we don't pick up on the score sheet as much. I mean, we're genuinely talking about a very well-rounded two-way winger. This was brought up a lot during his draft profiles and how kind of tenacious he was on the forecheck, how tenacious he was on the back check. I think at the NHL level, it's taken a little bit of time for it to fully translate, but I think really this year we're seeing it. He's an absolute hound on the puck from a two-way perspective. I think one other fun stat that I'll just throw out there, not to deluge us with numbers, but in terms of stick checks at 5-on-5, Raymond's 10th amongst wingers in the league. And the guys that are in front of him are kind of those top defensive wingers, particularly Noah Cates up at the top is the guy that I think a lot of people think of as a very good defensive player. And so he's doing it at both ends, not only with scoring, very real opportunity to be a Mark Stone type player, which is, I think, a lot of people were hoping for at the time of the draft.
Think of the rest of the forwards. Anyone standing out to you in terms of storylines, in terms of this is how the Red Wings got to where they are, or how the rest of the season goes is going to be largely dictated by their play?
I'm super curious about Marco Kasper in the remainder of this season. We've seen him get the ball rolling, starting to produce, and the Red Wings are mostly where they are without, productive contributions from him. And it'll be interesting to see if he gets going and how that sort of influences what Detroit wants to do in the short term. So I will definitely be having a closer look at him because I think he's turning the page. He's starting to get over that sophomore slump.
I'm going to go on a real limb here and say Alex DeBrincat, because when you get into stretches like this where it's all or nothing, you're going for the playoffs, everybody's playing their best hockey, defenses are starting to lock down, and it becomes a real playoff feel race. your big guns need to be your big guns. And the Red Wings are a team that struggles to score goals. Nobody's a more natural goal scorer on this team than Alex DeBrincat. So I'm not saying he has to score at a 50, 60, 70 goal pace the rest of the season, but the Red Wings almost don't have the luxury of him falling off for weeks at a time. So he's got to at least maintain some level of consistency in being the goal scorer they need him to be.
I can't let this conversation end without talking about Andrew Kopp. We have to talk about how good he's been. And I think he's been the biggest piece when we talk about the depth of this team. I mean, he was their best forward in December. I'm not overstepping by saying that. He was their best forward in December, is on pace to set a career high in points, which is not what we think of him for. He's the top faceoff guy on the team by percentage, something that has taken him a little bit to get back to, and is now playing very, very important minutes in just about every situation. I think he's really been the unsung hero, and that kind of allows more nuanced deployment of the rest of Detroit's offensive players because he can handle every situation. And I think this is the best he's played in his career, maybe outside of that New York Rangers stint. So I think the way he plays down the stretch and hopefully into the playoffs, I think will ultimately dictate how well this team can go, because he's really been the reason why they can survive the power play dipping off, the first line not playing as well as they've been. It's been a lot of on the back of Andrew Kopp and JVR, I think is the other one.
Yeah, I was going to say JVR, and we talked about the need to be able to score the hard areas of the ice. Who's better in that area of the ice than James Van Riemsdyk? We've seen it with goal scoring. We've seen it with playmaking. He's a style of player that they've really lacked. And if I remember right, was it 2 years ago that there was that report right at the deadline that Elliot Friedman reported, like there was something that Van Riemsdyk might be coming to Detroit. It didn't end up happening. Well, imagine had they gotten that done then and had him then, it would have made a big difference. Probably is the difference. 1 point getting into the playoffs that season. And he's made a big difference for him lately. They need him to keep it up too, but he's made a huge difference in the hard areas of the ice.
Now, flipping over to the defense, we have Prashanth here. We have to ask him to play his greatest hits. Prashanth, regale us with the Mo Seider Norris vote campaign.
You mean Hart Trophy campaign?
That's right.
Because
that's right.
I'm still on this. He's dipped a little bit from where he was in December. I think he had a little bit of a shaky January and hasn't scored as much as you would want for him to ultimately garner the attention he deserves. But I mean, Moritz Seider is unquestionably one of the 5 best defensemen in the NHL this season. And I think moving forward, it's going to be hard to find other guys that you would elevate in front of him. So I think he has certainly established himself as one of the 5 best players. And I look no further than the game against Colorado after Detroit had just gotten their butt kicked. And he goes and he shuts down Nathan MacKinnon, was the best player on the ice in Colorado, best team in the league. To me, that was like an MVP signature kind of game if that was, closer towards the end of the season and this was a tighter race. But he is unquestionably Detroit's, I think, heart, soul, engine, the thing that makes them go. And I think at the end of the day, he should get Norris votes. I don't think he'll win simply because of Makar's point totals, and Werenski, I think, is making a really strong case as well. But at a minimum, I would love to see him finish top 3 this year and then hopefully cement himself moving forward as a perennial top 5 candidate.
I think also part of his, shaky or at least relatively not as good month has been Edvinsson being out for 7 games. Then Seider has been back into, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, and so Prashanth, tell me if I'm wrong, but he's been back into like heavy defensive deployments to basically save the team's skin a lot of times. And I know the analytics technically say, depending on the model you're looking at or what metric you're looking at, say they isolate for that. But we've seen over Seider's career, the numbers, the underlyings don't really tell the story that you can see just by watching him. So he's almost dipping back into that kind of territory of he's being asked to do so much and the numbers aren't telling the story in terms of how much of a lift, which takes away from offensive zone starts, takes away from, quality minutes moving the puck up the ice and being more of a threat in that direction rather than preserving the team.
Yeah, I mean, just a simple one is since January 1st, 17 games played, Mo's second in the league in ice time per game. The only guy playing more than him is Quinn Hughes. Mo's playing 27 minutes a night. And so that's hard. And not only doing that without a dedicated partner, but rotating between having JBD, where you have 2 guys playing, right shot, and you're potentially switching back and forth. And then all of a sudden your next shift is out there with Albert Johansson. And then your next shift is out there with Ben Sherrod. And you are constantly adapting to different partners, playing all of these difficult minutes against the top matchups. He's had a rough go. And it's understandable why the point production drops off. All that being said, 27 minutes, he's still a +1 over that time period, which is just remarkable when you think about, how much Detroit struggled. So I think end of the day, still fantastic. Scoring numbers just aren't there, but that's all right.
The defensive component of his expected goals is actually improved in that span. Like in that time where he's played the most minutes in the league other than Quinn Hughes, his expected goals against per 60 went down. Like he's been even better defensively. It's just the offense hasn't been there to match it. So he is very plausibly the best defensive defenseman in the NHL. It's him and Jacob Slavin, I think, at the very top of the list.
All right, in our last bit here, outside of, making a trade to improve the team, let's talk about keys for the Red Wings as they look to solidify their playoff spot and get into the postseason for the first time in the LCA. 58 games played, 24 games left. I believe 10 of those are Atlantic Division matchups. Evan, you talk a lot about the importance of winning those games, especially now. What are the keys for the Red Wings, player to player or overall team play? What are you focusing on if you're Todd McClellan and the Red Wings to make sure that you survive this rat race?
John Gibson. It's the overly simple answer, but it's John Gibson. He has masked a lot of the Red Wings problems. We talked earlier about, the 5-on-5 offense is struggling. The expected goals against isn't great. The power play has not been clicking, and yet they've still been collecting points. Why? John Gibson. So as much as we all think many areas of the Red Wings' recent struggles will improve with or without trade, if they do and John Gibson goes in the tank, it almost might not matter. So as much as I would love to say, they need to score more. The power play needs to get going. They need someone other than Mo Seider to be able to defend at an elite level. If every shot goes in, it doesn't matter. So John Gibson, to me, is the obvious answer of he is the key, the singular key to whether or not the Red Wings are going to make the playoffs.
I'll pick one that kind of threads the needle between that and the defense, and then what we're obviously going to talk about with 5-on-5 scoring is the breakouts. If you can get out of your zone cleanly, not get hemmed in, obviously you limit the amount of exposure, the amount of work you're asking Gibson to do, and you should get the puck moving north with a chance to score. If you can't break the puck out cleanly, every single part of the game gets harder. So you could probably say that about any team, but breaking the puck out cleanly is going to be one of the biggest things I'm watching the whole final 6 weeks of the season.
Outside of what's already been raised, I think I'm going to go back to something that Evan mentioned before, is Marco Kasper continuing to build on what he's been able to kind of, I don't want to say salvage, put back together this season and the kind of game that he's been able to get back to. And there's still more to that. I think we saw a lot more from Marco Kasper last season than obviously even what we're seeing right now as he's had his resurgence. So keep that momentum going, get a positive snowball effect. And then the Red Wings are dealing with another positive impact player who can play down the middle. And so whatever happens with, Larkin or anyone else, you have a guy who's not a liability and instead can help cover up for any gaps.
I think the last thing I'll add is an external factor. I think it was raised earlier, the back-to-backs on Detroit's schedule. The Wings have 2 left. They've played a lot to date. They have 2 left. If you look at their Atlantic Division opponents, that's not so favorable for them. Boston has 6 left. Montreal has 6 left. Ottawa has 5 left. Florida has 5 left. Buffalo has 4 left. So the Wings actually, for once in their lives, have a favorable schedule down the stretch in terms of rest. Now, this is the NHL. No game is easy. No opponent can be overlooked. There's still a fair balance of quality opponents down the rest of the way. But I just like to point that out because now coming back, and some of those teams like Florida sending 10 guys to the Olympics, it's a compressed schedule for them to chase. And if you're Detroit, you've banked the points that you needed to bank. You may not play perfect hockey down the stretch. Everybody's still afraid of March, but your opposition has to, and a lot of those guys are going to be doing it in a much more fatigued manner just by the way the schedule played out.
All right, that is our Red Wings Roundtable. We're going to take one more quick break, and when we're back, we're going to do some housekeeping items and wrap up this episode of the podcast back after this. All right. With that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Massive shout out to Max Bultman of The Athletic Detroit and Prashanth Iyer, host of Expected by Whom and Winged Wheel Podcast contributor as well, for joining us on the show. Always great to have you guys back on and together. I know, Max, you were joking at the start of the show. You're not sure if that chemistry would ever work. So good to know that stood the test of an episode at least. With that, we're going to point you to the links in the description to get to Max Bultman's work on The Athletic Detroit, which is always worth the price of admission, and Prashanth's work both on our site and his Substack as well. Really great reads every single time. To all of our sponsors of the show, thank you so much. And to our Patreon supporters, we cannot do this without you. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. And if you want to help us out, but Patreon's not for you, that is totally okay. Wherever you're getting this podcast, subscribe, be it YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. It does help us a ton. And to our name level supporters on Patreon, we cannot thank you enough. Arjun Shankar, Aikfer, Martin Norberg, THL Champ, Samuel Soderholm, Klaus Sorensen, Mikkel Predstrup, Glenn Brabham, Rain Dano, Below Average Ball Hockey Goalie, Matthew M. Rice, Darb EQ, Sea Lion, Detroit Style, Deep Dish Cider, Finally Watched the Red Wings Win in Real Life, Hassam Al-Qassem, Asher Killian, Caitlin Wood, Alex Toger, That's What I Appreciate About You, Derek Enstam, Matt McKay, Andy Hardcore, Sam Bankston, Citizen High Five, R.A., Aaron Hudson, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, The El Cacho, Stephen Ortley, Jonathan Miller, Give Blood Fight Probert, DJ Denton, Carl Buchanan-Nanalewski, Raul Pudd, Jay Gollum, Settlers of Catan Stan, John Engels, Alex Bonilla, CB55, Connor Scovey, Adam Zoiza, Adam Rose, Denny's, Gamer Girl, Drinking Bailey's from a Shoe, Podgy713, Hockeytown Matt, Mr. Kuzi, Chaotic Monkey, Craig Kibble, Yzerman Stan, Clip Clop Nene, Unapologetic, Gibson Truther, Griffin Not From Grand Rapids, Winter Knight, Marty, Kazi the OG13, Jeff Pridemore, Eric Hill, Butts Carlton, Best James Bond, Beer League Legend, Alec, Mark Hernandez, Slim Smitty Cards, Grand Rapids Girly, Anna Sleeman, William, Mike Asher, August, Brian Munn, Improved But Flawed, Chris 99 Jones, Trevor Centerfit, Adams Red Wings Takes, Kurt Chin, Adam Ernie Slander, Kachuk Brothers, Walk to Church, Daniel Morowski, Zach Mounts, brand new name level supporter. Welcome, Zach, to the Dub Dub Club. Thank you so much for your support. General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Quaz, Dylan Larkin Trade Sacrifice, Play Freebird, Banana is Larger, Matt Keeler, Linda Hull, Connor Leighton, Good Cop, Brad Cop, Josh Yelton, Brad Simmons, Darren Fick, Bex, The Hodag, Dear Thrustmaster, and Christmas Fetishist with tinsel on his wheel stand. Race me on GT7. I'll lap your hairless ass. Max and Prashanth, that one has to be jarring for you to hear without some context there. 200-foot high compete, Maximilian, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheeseback Space Force, Sandin-Pellikka's Pet Pelican, Griffey Boy, JM Rhapsody, Frank Stanley, Rosie Posey, That Other Guy, Pucking, Puck, Tom Iserplan Respector, Carl Thames, Nerno, The Hat 123, Stephen A. Ron, Corey Prieto, All Motor No Hands, Gene Sullivan, Stinky Britches, James Pridemore, Upernadian, Adrock Jablonski, Drop the Puck, Eric Nance, Ann Stanislavski, Jim, Bellingham Massaballs, Wings Fan in St. Louis, Scott, Lucas Raitman, Cop Scump Lip, Trent Thorough, Grepsky, Evan Beckner, C.E. Hayes, Finney to the Rafters, Jacob Marsh, Falkness, Fight Night at the Joe, Axel Sandin-Pellikka, The Octopi's Ninth Leg, Finney the Pooh, I'm Evan, You're Evan, We're All Evan, Cassidy Hart, new name level supporter, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll make it up to you with the lost overtime in future, but for now, enjoy the break.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to visit wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you'll find links to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find ways to support the show, like Patreon, official podcast merchandise, and more. And don't forget to follow us on X at Winged Wheel Pod, at Ryan Hanna, WWP, at Brad Crisco, and at Hockeytown Evan, as well as Winged Wheel Podcast on Instagram.